That 5% that is vaporized and the smoke takes it into our lungs and into our bodies, 80% of that smoke is made of nanoparticles that are less than 0.1 microns.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we're speaking with Kim Tuemler, OR nurse and founder of Wylie-Tuemler OR Nurse Consulting. And Chris, Kim is an attorney turned OR nurse and has a fascinating story about her career change and also how she became aware of an issue and then became passionate about an issue and advocated for it. And as a nurse in her facility with maybe not as much experience as others there, she was still able to advocate for change. And I think it's very inspiring to hear that anyone with a voice who uses it can make change.
Absolutely. And, as somebody who's spent so much time in the operating room and right over the field and the OR patient, we just, I think, took it for granted that the smoke we were inhaling every day, every procedure was just a part of our life in the operating room. And what we're going to learn today is that's just not the case. So take a deep breath. Let's hope you don't have a bovie anywhere near you.
Yeah.
And strap in because Kim's going to definitely open her eyes.
Absolutely. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Kim Tuemler.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Kim Tuemler, OR nurse and founder of Wylie-Tuemler OR Nurse Consulting. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So excited to get to talk to you today. But for all of you listening, we have to take a step back in time and I have to share a little story about how Kim and I got connected. Just a little bit of a backstory, but it's important. Kim and I met through a mutual friend and podcast guest on First Case, Phyllis Quinlan. Phyllis is an executive coach and a personal coach and really is an absolute wealth of wisdom, advice, and insight. If you have an opportunity to ever sit and talk to Phyllis, I highly recommend that you do so. Just a plug here, it's one of your AORN benefits. If you're an AORN member, you get to talk to her. So you should take advantage of that. But Phyllis and I first met during a First Case interview. And then after that interview, I went on to connect with her and we actually ended up becoming friends. And I've enjoyed getting to meet her again and again at Expo and look forward to seeing her every single year. But last year, she came up to me with Kim and said, "You have got to meet Kim." So of course, I'm like, yes, of course, I need to meet Kim. So we sit and talk and I hear her story and Phyllis was like, "You have to interview Kim on the podcast." And when Phyllis tells you you have to do something, you say, "Yes, ma'am." And so I'm like, "Yes, ma'am. Of course, we will interview Kim on the podcast." But Kim's story really is really cool. And just hearing her passion and how she advocated for change, all of that stuff really resonates with all of us in the operating room because we see things that aren't right. We know they need to change. And then we actually see people who make it change. And so really cool story. I'm excited to get to have this conversation today with Kim. But without further ado, why don't you go ahead, Kim, and just tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. But first, I'd like to give a shout out to Phyllis. She is an amazing and truly gifted coach. And I was so fortunate in my early years to sign up for one of her free coaching sessions. And she's played a crucial role in helping me spread awareness about the surgical smoke. So thank you, Melanie, for doing as instructed and having me on First Case. I love that your first case includes a nurse and a surgical tech because I've learned so much from both in the operating room, and it is an honor to be a guest. As background, I've been a surgical nurse for nearly 5 years. Before that, I was a Marine Corps officer, a criminal trial attorney in state and federal courts for over a decade. After returning from deployment post 9/11, I chose to stay home with my family before starting nursing school.
Wow.
So not busy.
Not busy at all.
I like learning. I like taking on new things. I'm also a fitness instructor. I've always done that. So I just like constantly to learn.
For sure. So explain to me or to us how you went from attorney to nurse. What happened to make you make that transition?
Well, I don't want to sound too cheesy, but I met this awesome guy.
Nothing cheesy about that when they're amazing. That's okay.
So after September 11th, my husband and I both were deployed to Marine Corps Forces Europe, and that's where we met. And that's where our story started. And I stayed home with our kids for 17 years before realizing nobody really needed me anymore. So
not true.
It's not true.
Yeah.
Well, but with teenagers, I'd always been a fitness instructor. So I was like, I wanted to help people. That's what nurses do, right? We want to help people. And I'm right here in Charleston, South Carolina. So it was a natural transition for me to go to the Medical University of South Carolina. Shout out for them because I love MUSC. Graduated from there and went right into the operating room.
Really? Did you get to see the operating room in clinicals, or was this something you just knew you wanted to work in the OR, or what?
I was very fortunate that a surgeon that I knew was like, hey, come check it out. And I went and it was like magic. I was like, this is where I belong. This makes total sense.
Awesome.
We're all working together. We're working on one patient. It's very regimented,
cohesive.
Very.
I can see that appealing to you. Yes.
Yes. The type A in me was like, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a right way. There's a wrong way. Yeah, absolutely.
Do it all this way. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, that resonated with me too. So I can relate.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and that you got to see the OR a little bit in nursing school or have somebody who introduced it to you, because so many nurses go through nursing school and they never get to see the operating room because perioperative nursing electives aren't available at every school, or people don't have those connections that get them that exposure so they get to see how awesome we are and what a great department the operating room is. So that's awesome that you were able to go straight from school into the OR and knew that that was what you wanted to do. But then that kind of actually brings us to the kind of the root of our conversation today, because you got into the OR and then you saw and learned about surgical smoke and what happened.
So I got into the OR and level 1 trauma. It was awesome. And I was just hooking and jabbing, not really worrying about anything except what was just right in front of me. And so I kick myself now for not being a little more attuned to it at that point. But I was in the OR for 2 years. I got my CNOR. I did my peri-op. But it wasn't until October of last year when I attended AORN's guidelines workshop and I found out just how bad surgical smoke is for everybody in the operating room, how horrific it is, how literally deadly it can be to all of us. And I got really mad.
That's a good place to be, though. You're like, this is not good.
Yeah.
You found your soapbox, is what we say.
And the funny thing was, I didn't think I needed any more soapboxes. I mean, I had a long 10 years in the military as an attorney, and I was like, I didn't want any more soapboxes. But yes, I am standing on this one, and I'm stomping my feet.
So tell us how you found the dangers of surgical smoke. Was there one moment where it just kind of hit you? You know, there are certain smells that we have. You all know that, the tissue, there's alone. I always said, especially I work trauma as well. And there are certain smells and you immediately know exactly what that is when you walk in the room. You know, the kind of tissue, the surgery that we're doing. I don't know. What was that trigger for you that said, this is obviously something and we need to do something about it?
Well, that's where I feel a little naive because I've been smelling it for a couple of years.
But I had no idea, right?
Yeah. I was just like, this is being in the OR. I'm part of the OR. I was very excited. But when I was at the AORN conference and they started throwing out all the chemicals that are in it, and the tagline that just got hold of me and I can't let go of is the one that spending a day in the operating room is equivalent to inhaling the smoke from 27 to 30 unfiltered cigarettes.
Yeah.
Not even cigarettes, unfiltered cigarettes.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
I've never been a smoker. That's not my thing. I mean, I grew up back in the 70s with my parents smoking in the car and me crying for them to stop. So, not a fan of smoke, but I just thought it was part of life in the OR. And that's why when I found out in October of last year that it didn't have to be, and we know better, and we've known better for 30 years, that I got so angry about it.
Yeah. Well, and some of the research goes back to the early 80s when they were recognizing that there were chemical compounds, carcinogen type compounds in surgical smoke. And yet here we are in 2024 and it's still an issue. We had one person that we talked to on the podcast a while back when we were talking another conversation about surgical smoke, because it's one we talk about frequently. They made the comment that the surgeons just said that that's the smell of success. That's what it's supposed to be. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. It's not the smell of success. But let's provide some education, because I know this is your soapbox and you are passionate about this topic. Why is surgical smoke so bad? If somebody is not yet convinced that they don't need to be breathing it, what is going on with surgical smoke that makes it so dangerous?
So starting from the basics, over 90% of our surgeries in the operating room involve electrosurgery or lasers, and each of those and other different pieces of equipment put off surgical smoke. People have called it surgical plume. Call it whatever you want. It's smoke. It smells noxious. Imagine it's burning tissue. It smells awful for anybody that's not been in the operating room, let alone if it's an infected tissue or a necrotic tissue or a cancerous tissue. So it smells awful, but when the electrocautery or the laser is used, tissue is cut at such a high temperature that it coagulates the blood, it prevents infection, it does lots of wonderful things. However, because it's at that high of a temperature, it ruptures the cells. The cells are ruptured, and then 95% of the smoke is water. The scary part is the water serves as a vector for the 5%, and in that smoke is hydrogen cyanide, toluene, benzene, xylene, HPV, HIV, HBV, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide. I could go on and on. There are over 150 chemicals when tissue is burned in the operating room with electrocautery or a laser. 16 of them are on the EPA's priority pollutants. It's mind-blowing to me that that is happening, and hospitals are still allowing that to occur because there are so many different options and so many different companies that cater to the surgeons to try and get the aerodynamic, whatever kind of pen they want, make them happy. They're being catered to, and everything's, these companies want to evacuate the smoke. I'm not supporting any one company, but there's so many ways to evacuate the smoke so that we don't have to breathe it in.
These are so many great points. And, Kim, we laser condylomas. And, we've had experiences in the operating room where, I've had a surgeon say, oh, this is a rite of passage, welcome to your operating room. Yeah. And that those condylomal particles are going somewhere. And yes, we have masks on and those masks filter. But of course, as we learned in COVID, filtration rates vary, and we're not wearing N95 masks in every single operating room, are we? And for every single operation. And so these different levels of protection, they matter not just to us, but also to our patients, right?
Absolutely. And Chris, along those lines, our surgical masks were initially developed to protect the patients from us. They don't stop anything. Those surgical masks will stop 5 microns. That's it. Our N95s, they've been tested to stop up to 0.3 microns.
And that's if they fit correctly, correct?
But here's the kicker. that 5% that is vaporized and the smoke takes it into our lungs and into our bodies, 80% of that smoke is made of nanoparticles that are less than 0.1 microns.
So they are filtering right on through, straight through your nostrils, into your mouth, and down your lungs.
Everything. Into your blood.
Yeah, something else mind-blowing. So when we think about surgical smoke, we think of the patient on the table, their knee or their belly is cut open and smoke is going off into the room and getting all around. Laparoscopic surgery also produces surgical smoke. But where does that smoke go?
Well,
it's all contained in the abdomen, right?
Not at all.
Kim, go ahead.
It's cytotoxic. It's absorbed into the blood. It is so bad for everyone to absorb that blood in.
It can cause elevated chemical levels in the urine too. And studies have shown that patients after surgery, they have higher benzene levels in their urine after laparoscopic surgery than they obviously did beforehand. And so there are terrifying studies out there that show whether we're doing an open case or a laparoscopic case, it doesn't matter. If surgical smoke is generated, then your patient is at risk. Your staff is at risk. And think about too, with a laparoscopic case, once they deflate the abdomen, where do you think all that built up surgical plume is going? In concentrated doses out into the room.
Yeah, we're all breathing it in.
Exactly. And laparoscopic cases were the ones that actually I didn't put 2 and 2 together on for a long time. Obviously, I can see the smoke coming out of the knee when we're doing a total knee, but I didn't think about laparoscopic cases for a long, long time. Then I'm like, oh, holy smokes, literally. And I'm like, oh, dang. So yeah, totally, so much risk. And every case that generates smoke, whether laparoscopic or open, is risk. And I think people need to really
and that's a great point, because the patients are intubated. They don't have masks on. There's nothing protecting them. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're worried about everybody in the OR. They're in the OR. The thing that kills me is C-sections. Newborn babies. That's their first breath of air.
It's disgusting. Yeah.
I didn't even, bless their hearts. Yeah. Good grief. So Kim, once you learned all of these hazards and like our red lights are flashing and our heads are spinning, what did you start to do? You went to an AORN guideline workshop, correct?
Correct. So it was
how'd the wheel start spinning?
It was a one-day workshop. I just happened to do it on a Saturday just for fun, because as we discussed, I like to learn. And I came back, it was in Nashville, and I came back here to Charleston, and I went to my hospital, and I'm like, hey, we've got to evacuate the smoke. And everybody's just looking at me like, yeah, whatever, Kim. And I said, no, we have to evacuate the smoke. They're like, well, we need to do some evidence-based studies. We needed this, we needed that. And I said, no. And I showed them some of the case studies I had. I said, we need to do this. We have the capacity. We have the things in the operating room. We just need to open the smoke evac pencils.
Yeah. Well, and when you look, I know you wrote an article that was amazing, by the way. We've looked at that, and I'm sure we can link that article when this episode airs. And I even looked at an article from AST, the Association of Surgical Technologists. This article, it has 17 different studies that it too, speaks of. And that was back from May 2017. So as you've said, there are so many research articles and case studies that have been done that show us this is bad. So now it's about getting compliance, right?
Yes. And before we move on, I just wanted to mention the studies and the cases, they are all fantastic. However, there are surgeons out there. There are other people that want to argue about it. They want to argue about how the study was done, or who funded it, or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I backed up and I went to the government, and I am actually holding, this is my favorite thing to hold. It's from NIOSH, which falls under CDC,
right.
Published September 1996. You know how many years ago that was?
Yeah, I was a sophomore in high school, if I have to admit that.
September of 96. Our government said research studies have confirmed that this smoke plume can contain toxic gases and vapors such as benzene, hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, bioaerosols, dead and live cellular material, including blood fragments, and viruses. And At the end, it also says smoke has unpleasant odors and has been shown to have mutagenic potential. So
Wow.
we've known since 1996, carcinogenic, mutagenic.
Okay, so that NIOSH article, is it available to the public?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I linked it in my
That's
article
right.
that I wrote for the nursing beat.
Awesome. That is correct. You did. So let's make sure that we will link your article so people can then follow the trail and see this information for themselves. But that is huge because we do hear a lot of arguments against the smoke evacuation topic because they're like, oh, well, that's just funded by somebody who wants you to buy their product or whatever. And if you go back all the way back to 96 and it's not a company, it's our government saying, hello, this might be an issue. I think it makes people listen. So then did that article and using that data, is that what helped your facility pay attention and take it seriously?
The facility I was in at that time was the smaller facility and I knew the surgeons. So I just went around. I would catch them in the OR. I would catch them at the scrub sink and I just start talking to them.
The squeaky wheel, right? That's
Exactly.
all you had to do.
You were the smoke evacuation evangelist.
Yeah, they couldn't get away from me. But I was very lucky because we had a new chief of surgery and she does a lot of laparoscopic and a lot of robotic work. And she understood the studies and the evidence. And she was all on board. So she supported me and I was able to brief all the surgeons and explain to them the hazards and the dangers. And it's now a thing. That hospital is now smoke free. So
that's amazing. That is absolutely incredible. And all it took was let me rephrase that. All it took was you finding out something, being passionate about seeing something changed and advocating for the safety of the patients and the staff. But that can seem overwhelming, I think, to some people to think that one person actually has the power to make that big of a change. But you're proof that that's true.
Well, and I didn't do it by myself. I mean, I'm not saying any names, but the vendors that we already had at our hospital, I pulled them in and I used them to do education and, of course, bring food because that makes people pay attention.
Everybody loves food.
Yeah, that's our love language.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Feed me, I will listen to anything.
Well, I have college kids now. That's the only time they'll hang out with me if I actually feed them lunch.
Yep,
True.
Yep.
But
I don't ask for dinner frequently.
Yeah. And that's part of the problem though, because, right, you have all of this research and you can have, now there are new standards and administration is on board and they say this is what we're going to do. But there are barriers to compliance. And a lot of that comes from changing the habits of the actual OR staff, like getting buy-in and then making them consistent. And especially using products because we're creatures of habit. Surgeons like the Yonkauer tip that they like. And, they only want to use this product. And how did you get buy-in from the surgical techs that are using it and and the assistants and the surgeons that are actually, honestly breathing it in from source point?
Great point there with people are used to what they're used to. And if surgeons have been practicing for 30 years and they've been smelling that every day for 30 years when they do their total knees, they don't want to change. Why should they do anything different?
And that's what they think success smells like. So, right?
Disturbing.
Yeah. So I just educated and I spoke to them and I actually had breast cancer when I was in nursing school. And I tell people that's not my personal thing, but I just want people to understand I've had cancer. I don't want to have cancer again. And I sure don't want you to have cancer. And if we can prevent inhaling carcinogenic materials, then let's do that.
It's interesting you bring that up, that you have a past history of cancer, not brought about because you were in the operating room, but you don't want cancer again. And certainly people find out, we hear the stories of so many people who get diagnosed with lung cancer, or they have really bad asthma, or all of these other health issues that are directly traced back to being in the operating room. One nurse that I know ended up having to have part of her lung removed because she developed lung cancer, and all of it was because of working in the OR. There's another person in the Southeast who recently passed away, and she had been fighting cancer, all related to surgical smoke. Another nurse in Rhode Island who advocated for legislation in Rhode Island, major asthma, actually ended up dumping out her bag of inhalers and asthma medication in the hearing for the legislation saying, I don't want to use this stuff anymore. Like the place where I work should not cause me this much heartache and illness. So there's lots of stories out there of different nurses who have had direct health concerns, and not just nurses. We've heard stories of surgeons. We've heard stories of surgical techs too, all sorts of different health issues that have been directly correlated back to working in the OR, which then of course leads us to the advocacy for, you advocated for your facility, you advocated for yourself, and you saw it change at your facility, but now you're actually working at a higher level than that, right?
Yes, I knew that I needed to continue working on this issue. So I asked my hospital to go PRN, and they weren't able to make that happen. So I've been floating around, but I now have a new home and I'm able to work PRN. I'm back in the operating room at a hospital that is already smoke free in South Carolina, but I am working towards getting the state of South Carolina to be smoke free. I've worked with some people I know that are in the legislature, and we will be introducing a law, pre-filing it in December for when the legislature comes back in January. So,
oh, that's exciting.
I'm so thrilled.
Because there are 8 states right now that currently have smoke-free legislation. Is that correct, or are there more 18 than that?
There's 18.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Hello. I'm off.
No, it's okay. I live and breathe this stuff, so it's literally 18.
Well, and that's 18 too few, but it has to start from grassroots. But it would be nice to have federal regulation to help move it along.
Yes.
Speaking of advocating at a federal level, at a state level, at a higher level than just our individual hospitals for smoke evacuation legislation. Well, we're also very familiar with Joint Commission, and that's not just located at one hospital. They have guidance that affects all of us. What do they say about surgical smoke?
Joint Commission took a stand on surgical smoke and a quick safety issue in December of 2020, and it basically recites everything that NIOSH stated 28 years ago, and as the same things OSHA talks about, the mutagenic, carcinogenic potentials, but it goes further to state that the surgical smoke can enter a person's blood and lymphatic circulatory systems and travel to various distant organs. It transmits viral bacteria and human papillomavirus. It can cause in vitro mutations and be a contributing factor to higher rates of pregnancy complications for female surgeons.
Wow.
Hello.
Ew, that's terrifying.
Ew.
They know that. They're coming and checking us right now, and I just want to shake them and be like, hey, you know this. Can we do something about this now?
Yeah. That's infuriating. It's so hard because, you just wonder if people maybe turn a blind eye, and we want to stop people from doing that. And Kim, I want your advice because, I'm an educator, so it's my job to put new babies out into the world. And of course you want them to have these great habits and you want them to advocate for the right thing. But, for those new grads, whether they're a surgical tech or they're a nurse, maybe they don't have their voice yet and they're seeing these things and they want to do the right thing. What's your advice for people that are going into a hospital that's not smoke free yet, that want to advocate for the right thing? What do you say to them? How do they get started in advocating for a smoke free work environment?
Love that question, because having just gone through nursing school, I'm definitely much older than most of the nurses that are starting. And you're young, you're in your 20s, and it's difficult. So the Association of Operating Room Nurses is the best place to start. They are fabulous. They've got the guidelines. I'm on their legislative calls. They are helping me to get my feet on the ground in South Carolina. They are a great place to start. But I will say there's nothing wrong with just saying it and saying it again and saying it again until somebody listens. Somebody's got to listen.
But we've talked about this time and time again, right? Everybody has the ability to see something, to see an issue, to see a problem, and to speak up and say something if it's not safe, if it's not right. And those of us that have been around longer, that have had more experience, whatever, the newer generation of nurses and surgical techs might feel intimidated or feel like they can't say anything because they don't have 20 years of experience under their belt. But Kim, you don't have 20 years of nursing experience either, but you have the ability to read research and to find out what's going on and to champion that for your facility and for your state, which has to be encouraging to anyone else listening that I can do this too. The data's there. I can provide the data. I just need to educate people and let them know what's going on, right?
Absolutely. That is the biggest hurdle. I actually carry my Smoke-Evac pencil. I scratched out the name of the company. I carry it with me when I fly. I carry it when I travel. I took it to my hairdresser. I take it to the gym. Everybody at my gym, I teach yoga there. Everybody knows about surgical smoke, and they're all horrified. But nobody knows what they don't know.
Yeah. Education is always the key. And I think we're always taught to protect and advocate for the patient. And I think sometimes the OR staff thinks that what they're standing up for is themselves. And sometimes, that can be harder to do. But what we're learning, especially in this podcast, is that you're not just standing up for your own health. What we're learning is that it's the health of that patient too. And at the end of the day, you've got to advocate for doing the right thing for your patient on the table, regardless of your role in the OR.
100%. And the thing about the OR is it's such a team. And I looked at my coworkers, and if I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for them.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
I can't think of a better way to end that. That's
exactly.
Such a great point, Kim.
Absolutely. Fantastic point. But we do always give the guest the mic one final time before we wrap up our conversation. So I do want to turn it back over to you. If you have any other final thoughts, final encouragement, final information you want to put out there before we wrap up this conversation today.
Yes, thank you. We all recognize that cigarette smoking leads to numerous healthcare issues, including cancer and premature death. And the journey toward smoke-free environments in the United States began in 1973. State by state, laws were enacted banning surgical smoke in all 50 states. So the next time you enter your hospital, take a moment to read that sign that says smoke-free on the doors. If spending a day in the operating room can expose us to the equivalent of 27 to 30 unfiltered cigarettes, is your hospital really smoke-free? If there are no smoke evacuation systems and policies in place to protect you and everyone else in the operating room, then your facility isn't truly smoke-free. You have the power, and I believe the responsibility, to advocate for change. Nurses are the most trusted professionals in our nation because we prioritize patient care and we speak the truth, even when it's difficult. I also want to include surgical technicians in that group because their contributions are invaluable, and if people actually knew what they did, they would include them in the most trusted professions. With this trust comes great power, and with that power, we have the duty to advocate for what's right. Now that you are aware of the dangers posed by surgical smoke, each of you must speak up. I'd like to remember Angela Hone from Georgia. She was a remarkable woman who devoted 43 years to the operating room as a certified perioperative nurse and first assist. She was an avid runner who didn't drink or smoke and lived a healthy lifestyle. Tragically, she was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer and passed away in January of this year. Let her legacy inspire us to advocate for a safer environment for everyone in our care and each other. I would like to share Angela's words regarding mandating surgical smoke evacuation. She said, "We all have to stick together. We all have to be on one accord and agree that this is it. This is hazardous. This is unhealthy. This is unsafe."
Well said.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
That was Kim Tuemler, OR nurse and founder of Wylie-Tuemler OR Nurse Consulting. And wow, To say that she is passionate about this topic is definitely an understatement, but it is a good topic to be passionate about because we are at risk of being exposed every single day that we are in the operating room, and we don't have to be. And I liked the point that she made at the end about all of our buildings have signs that say they're smoke-free, but our ORs are not all smoke-free, and they need to be. And Chris, I was actually curious, as we wrap up this conversation today, we talked a lot about AORN. Kim has been really involved with AORN and gotten a lot of information from them for advocating for smoke evacuation. But AST is also very involved as well, right? What is AST doing?
Absolutely. Just like AORN, AST has lobbyists that are working with legislative bodies, and specifically they do that with the state assemblies for AST. And that's definitely where somebody could get involved. So they're just as passionate as Kim, and this episode opened their eyes to the dangers like it did all of us. That's where you can help. So get involved with your state assembly in AST, work with the board of directors, work with your local hospitals, and help to, get your state to put forth legislation, to become smoke-free, because it is endangering your health, the health of your family, the health of your patients on the table. And what we're learning is it's just not necessary, and we can do something about it.
Absolutely. And we will also include a link in our social media write-up of this article that will link to Kim's article, which will then also link you to that NIOSH article that she referenced. And so if you need something that seems a little less supported by one group or another, you can't get any better than a NIOSH article that is straight from our government talking about how dangerous surgical smoke is for our health. That's all the time we have for today. On behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.